Look, that guy Glenn is probably one of the best YouTubers ever. Hands down. One of my favorites. So today we're watching his Hollow Knight video. Let's go.
Hollow Knight's origin story goes all the way back to August 2013, when two friends from Australia decided to enter a game jam together.
It's 11 years
Ori
ago.
Gibson,
God
a
damn.
skilled animator, and William Pellin, an all-round designer, first met each other through mutual friends about 10 years before development on Hollow Knight began. William used to be a web designer, but always had a passion for video games, so he started making games in his spare time. He made his first game called Return
Has
to
anyone ever played Booty
in
Grotto?
October 2012,
I feel like I gotta.
and published it on
I feel like I gotta go back and play it.
After that, he made another game the next year called Lulanda, which he developed with Stencil, a tool designed to make games quick and easy. Just like Return to Booty Grotto, Lulanda can still be played on Newgrounds today. For example, Ori directed a cutscene for the Wii game The Blob. And sharing a love for video games.
So crazy to think that he just directed like one scene of The Blob, like, and that probably was like a whole team behind that one scene. That's how big studios probably are.
Excellent way for developers to flex their skills and test their durability against stress, since you only have a very limited amount of time to complete and submit.
Isn't there like a game jam that's like a 48-hour train ride to GDC? I think I just heard that in a video somewhere, like that there's like a 48-hour train ride to GDC, and they do a game jam on that train. That sounds so cool to me. It sounds miserable also, but like very cool. Yeah. Let's get back to it. By the way, I'm streaming on my Switch because my computer is so bad. So this is what we're doing, reaction videos on a Nintendo Switch. Amazing.
The theme for the 27th edition of Ludum Dare was 10 seconds.
Ooh, this is the 10-second one.
Team Cherry was able to successfully create a game within the allotted time, it was arguably not very good. Hungry Knight was a simple top-down survival game where you had to slay insect-looking creatures.
I feel like that back view of the Hollow Knight is like so iconic, and it's probably because of this game right here. Like, we don't really get like that view a whole lot. It's like the Radiant fight or whatever, like when you like step up to it, right? There's like only a few times where he's like, and then he was like holding the knife or, you know, the nail to the right or whatever. Like, that's so iconic to me. But like, I feel like this game probably had it a lot because you're looking at the back view of him a lot. But it's interesting anyway.
Yeah. Otherwise, the player character would perish. Unfortunately, the game wasn't very stable and was plagued with frame drops. When the team published Hungry Knight on the Newgrounds website, it received a user rating of 1 out of 5 stars. The predecessor to Hollow Knight is still playable today, and nowadays the game has a user rating of 4 out of 5 stars. Even though Team Cherry didn't win the Ludum Dare Game Jam, and gamers didn't seem to connect much to their first creation, Hungry Knight did lay the foundation.
It's crazy how that character model isn't that different on that sidewalk.
Compelling art style was something the team wanted to further explore. Before they would start development on Hollow Knight, Team Cherry took on 2 more game jams. About a month after Ludum Dare, the 3 developers participated in the Indie Speedrun 2013 Game Jam, and the theme this time around was wealth, while their element was chosen to be Mummy. Although they weren't able to finish their game,
so they did what
Game
Tooncat.
Jam's deadline, Team Cherry still finished and published it on Newgrounds. The next Ludum Dare Game Jam took place in April 2014, with the theme that year being Beneath the Surface.
And this is the one.
Shape and refine the groundwork for Hollow Knight.
Yeah, that's the one right there.
Time, Ori couldn't stop thinking about Hungry Knight and the protagonist they had created. Therefore, the small indie studio decided to combine Hungry Knight with the Beneath the Surface theme, and it turned out to be a perfect match. Shortly after Ludum Dare, there was another jam with the theme Beneath the Surface, which we thought was really evocative.
I wonder if he has like an OG drawing he did where it was like, yeah, this is the one, like with that theme in the Hollow Knight, like that one of those first drawings. I wonder what that is.
Of the world, and everything kind of snowballed from there. Not long after, Ori and William decided to quit their jobs and go all in with developing their first official video game. For the next couple of months, Ori and William were fully devoted to their new project, and worked hard to get a proof of concept off the ground. Ori would
God,
take
that
on the role
OG
of the game's art
town. Hold
supervisor.
up. Look at the background of that. Like, look at all those buildings and stuff in Dirtmouth. That looks so cool to me. God, I can't wait to see, like Silksong have like an expansive like town or towns in it. Ooh, it looks like the Grubfather like little huts are there too. Interesting.
And worked hard to get a proof of concept off the ground. Ori would take on the role of the game's art supervisor, while William would oversee the game's overall design. The title Hungry Knight was originally chosen because the character needed to eat cherries every 10 seconds, but since that wasn't part of their new idea anymore, they decided to change it to Hollow Knight. When it came to choosing what engine to use, Team Cherry decided to take to Luland a prototype that William had made with Stencil and adapted it to fit their needs for Hollow Knight. Both Ori and William knew they had to focus on the moment-to-moment mechanics first, and this involved getting the movement of the player character just right. We wanted players to feel
Hollow Knight
totally
might
in
be the
control
most
of their
perfect
character at
moving
all
character
times,
ever.
so our model for movement was the Mega Man and Mega Man X series.
Maybe I
The
should
knight
play
has
those.
no acceleration or deceleration on horizontal movement. The jump has a lot of initial lift, releasing the button cuts vertical speed quickly, and the dash completely arrests vertical movement, shooting you forward instantly. Any hit they take or mistake they make could have been avoided right up until the last second. It's a principle we try to roll out through the rest of the game, but it all started with the knight's run and jump, the very first things to be coded. After the pair was satisfied with the knight's movements, they directed their attention to the theme that sparked it all, the place beneath the surface. Ori and William had this idea for a mysterious kingdom that had fallen from grace, which ended up becoming Hollow Nest. The game is heavily inspired by the Metroidvania genre, and in those games one of the key elements is the map, so naturally designing the world of Hollow Knight became a major focus for the indie studio. However, they wanted to set it apart from other Metroidvania games, and this became the most difficult design challenge throughout the whole development. The map and the mapping system took a long while to come together. We wanted players to feel like an explorer entering uncharted lands, so we knew that the map couldn't work in a Metroid-style way. It couldn't know the shape of the landscape before the player did, but it also couldn't be so
I feel like with Silksong, it's like, it's just like this. They probably had to wait a while for the map to just kind of build itself. Like, I wonder if we play the OG versions of Hollow Knight, it's probably ass. It's probably not ass, but it's probably still really dope. But it's like, I'm sure, and yeah, they've mentioned it before, but like, yeah, it loses all its impact if it remains like a small scale game early on, and I'm sure that that's all they wanted to do. But as it built, like, and I say all this to say that maybe Silksong is just expanding so much, and because Hollow Knight's already their blueprint for that, so it's like that's like their base. So and like the base for Hollow Knight was way less than what it actually was. So the base of Hollow Knight is tiny and ends up being this big masterpiece. And then they have like a base of a masterpiece. So it's like, where's Silksong gonna end up? Where's that gonna be? We'll see.
unfriendly that a player would turn off the game in frustration. Their solution was to implement an NPC character that sells parts of the map, while also letting players expand the map themselves as they keep exploring.
So
When the two
fun.
developers figured out how
Such
to
a
approach
fun
the
part
map
of Hollow
system
Knight. It's
from a
kind of
mechanical
annoying a couple times,
standpoint,
but like,
they still needed to make it visually appealing. The map in Hollow Knight almost looks like a maze, but Team Cherry was able to find a good balance between suggesting enough information and not overwhelming the player with details. To further emphasize a sense of discovery and exploration, the team focused on giving the player interesting things to stumble on, such as hidden characters, treasures, and battles. A common criticism of Metroidvania games is the large amount of backtracking that's required. Players often have acquired
still have
more
never
abilities
played
at this point,
a
making
Metroid
earlier
game.
areas in those
I'm
games
sorry.
much easier
Sorry.
and might cause the overall experience to deflate. Team Cherry was able to partially overcome this problem by making one of the starting areas of the game more dynamic, changing it as a player comes closer towards the ending. A lot of the art in the game was hand-drawn by Ori and scanned directly into the engine. I photographed them with my phone and cleaned them up on the computer. From there, it's just adding pieces into the world until it feels full. Keep it simple was our visual goal. That mantra carried through to the rest of the art, and was probably integral in us being able to create so large a world in
I really want to see his phone process. I want to see, because it's probably so it's probably like it's I just know that process of like back and forth from your phone to your computer, airdrop and shit. Like that's just so funny to think that that's how like the characters and that's how like the enemies are made. They're just he's snapping a little photo of the drawing and then just tracing it in Illustrator. That's amazing. And then animating it from there, crazy.
2 years.
Genius.
Ori and William had big ideas for Hollow
But it's so
Knight,
manic too, probably. Like
or any form of income for that matter, they wouldn't be able to execute their full vision for the game. Therefore, when no less than 5 sections of the map were completed after about 6 months of development, the team felt it was
God,
time
imagine
to
that
take
art
it to
book.
the next step.
Imagine
and
getting your
launch a
hands on that
Kickstarter.
real life art
On
book.
November 18th, 2014, the Hollow Knight Kickstarter went live, and the funding goal was set to 35,000 Australian dollars. While the Kickstarter
How
ultimately
many
shot
of you
past
just
that
wish you could fund Hollow Knight now? Like, God, it would have so much backing now. So much.
goal
It's
with
crazy.
over 57,000
And they're still delivering
Australian
Silksong
dollars
off of a
and
Hollow
more
Knight
than
backing
2,000
thing.
backers,
I know a lot of people use
Team
that as a
Cherry
tool to
only
be
reached
pissed,
their
but it's like
funding
so
goal 3
amazing.
days before the Kickstarter was over. Near the end of the Kickstarter, however, donations skyrocketed, so some of the more interesting stretch goals were funded, including a Wii U port and an additional playable character. Shortly after the launch of the Kickstarter, Rohan Fraser decided to depart from Team Cherry to focus more on his career as an animator and illustrator. Ori and William had now secured the future of Hollow Knight's development.
See,
and
that's
were
like the
able to hire
iconic
more
pose, but
people
it's
to
like
help
from
finish
the front.
2D platformer. David Causey was brought on board
And
as
he's holding it on
technical
the left.
director to assist with coding the game, while Chris Larkin was hired to produce the game's music and sound effects. Chris had already worked with Ori once before, on one of Ori's short films called Motorbike. After the successful Kickstarter, the team was also able to afford office space and moved their studio to the city
Got
of
a little
Adelaide in
Metroid.
South Australia. Besides funding the development, the Kickstarter was also a clear sign for Team Cherry that Hollow Knight resonated
Damn,
with
that photo with the
gamers.
Watcher Knight is so
It was
cool.
the first signal, conceptually at least, that we were onto something cool. We ran a beta several months after that, which included the entire first area of the game, the Forgotten Crossroads. It was a stellar response to that area that really cemented our direction for Hollow Knight. Since the studio would now be porting the game to the Wii U, they needed an engine
Yeah.
that was a bit more flexible.
Totally.
With the help of experienced programmer David Causey, they were able to drop Stencil and upgrade to the Unity engine. Aside from better flexibility, the engine also allowed them to add more visual flair, which became apparent when the developers put the results side
Interesting.
by side. Hollow Knight was originally scheduled to release in June 2015.
Yeah, the Dole
and back
trailer
then, the team
makes
estimated
sense.
that
It
the
wasn't
game
the
would only
Unity
be
one.
around 2 to 3 hours long. Thanks to the success of the Kickstarter, however, the team was able to drastically expand the scope and add more content. For example, the developers added a lot more areas to explore in the Kingdom of Hallownest. More areas also meant more different kinds of enemies and bosses, which took a huge chunk of time to develop. Ori was mainly responsible for all the art in the game, and he has said that many of the character designs were done on the fly and started with a single sketch. Because of time constraints,
It's
he
interesting. A
wasn't
lot of
able
those
to
photos had a
iterate
lot
on
more
most of his
bugs like
designs,
hung up
so
in like
whatever he drew in his sketchbook
spider
would go
webs and
straight
stuff.
into
I
the
wonder
game. Sketches like these,
if the
while
spiders were
seriously
supposed to be
crude,
like
form the
real
basis for most of
sinister.
the game.
I mean, they already
To
were,
date,
but
I filled 3 sketchbooks for Hollow Knight. Almost everything within makes its way into the final game. Very little is wasted. Most of these sketches are produced on Thursday nights at a cafe meetup of local artists. The sketches produced during that event tend to cover about a week's worth of final work. Once Ari had drawn a sketch,
That's
he would
crazy.
place it into
Just
Photoshop
one fun
to make a
meetup
digital
night,
version
sketch
and
and
animate
shit.
it in Photoshop as well. This whole process could take up to a week for a boss character, but for a normal enemy, Ari was able to do it much faster, sometimes in less than 2 hours, including programming the enemy in Unity. To streamline this process, Team Cherry used a plugin for Unity called Playmaker. This plugin provides a visual programming system
I love that guy
through the use
Glenn.
of
He really
flowcharts,
gets into
making it
everything.
much
Like,
easier to understand how to implement things like the enemy AI. William, with a basic knowledge of coding, was now able to program a lot of the enemy behavior himself, giving David more time to focus on other programming tasks. In the end, a total of 149 enemy characters were created for the base version of the game, with over 30 of them being bosses. It is worth noting that a lot of the art was conceived in collaboration with William, who was normally very busy constructing the game's systems, but occasionally he would come up with his own character designs. The cartographer is one of those designs. Ari added that Hollow Knight's overall look and feel is really a middle ground between him and William, including elements like lore and dialogue. Speaking of dialogue,
yeah,
both
there's so
Ari
much
and
different
William are
shit in this
responsible for all
footage.
the text in the game. They always had a basic plot planned out for Hollow Knight, but much of the lore was added organically as the team added more content. The final version of the script ended up being around 20,000 words long and was all written in a Google spreadsheet. Hollow Knight was influenced by many different titles, such as Metroid, Castlevania, Zelda 2, Faxanadu, and the aforementioned Mega Man X. Furthermore, the badge system that's present in the game was directly inspired by Paper Mario. One of the more interesting and unique
Interesting. I never
mechanics
played that.
originated from an interview where Team Cherry was asked what happens to the player when they die. We said something like, "Oh, it'll be a great surprise." And then after the interview, we realized we hadn't actually considered that yet. We'd already
I feel like that's
completed the knight's
more
death
so the case
animation,
with
which ends
everything,
with
where
his head
people
falling
don't
to the
actually have a
ground and
plan for it.
cracking. We thought it might be
People think it was
interesting
like
if
this
you had
big
to travel
thought of
back to
thing,
the
but it
place
was
you died,
never that.
find the skull, and crack it open to regain your money. Then we kicked around some ideas about the skull
See, it's a
being
lot of times
possessed
it's
by
them
an
just
enemy,
figuring anything
or
out that
suddenly
works for
fighting
them.
back, which seemed really funny. This evolved into the idea of leaving behind a ghost of your previous life that attacks you, which eventually became the shade that you encounter in the final game. This is a really good example of a simple mechanical idea we made early on that seemed inconsequential at the time, ending up having a huge impact on the lore and the history and the nature of the character you play as, which happened a lot. As mentioned before, the game's music was performed by Chris Larkin, who was given a lot of freedom and support by Team Cherry. The main instruments Chris used were the piano and the viola, and he worked on the soundtrack on and off for about 2 years, giving him plenty of time to refine the musical themes in Hollow Knight. Since the narrative becomes
I'm usually one that doesn't appreciate soundtracks. Like, I like some, but it's nothing that I could just listen to. But after editing enough videos with Hollow Knight in the background, I love the soundtrack.
Commonly used in film and opera, and Chris describes it as a short melodic phrase that gets used in certain places or themes. In Hollow Knight, this translates to certain melodies coming back later in the game to connect specific areas and themes. Although there's no real spoken dialogue in the game, there are a lot of voices attached to characters, and most of those were done by William, Ari, and someone Team Cherry shared an office with. That someone is Makoto Koji, who runs her own animation studio called Paper Rabbits, and she provided about 90% of the female voices. Some of the rest of the voiceover work was performed by friends and families of the developers. As the team came closer to the end of Hollow Knight's development, they hired
She's an
Matthew Griffin
icon,
to market
low-key.
the game. Matthew reached out to streamers and content creators to play and cover Hollow Knight, in order to create as much word of mouth as possible. He also set up a deal with Fangamer to help release Hollow Knight related merchandise. Additionally, he also scheduled many interviews
I
with
still
news
need a grub
outlets.
plush.
While Team Cherry had already created quite a lot of word of mouth through Kickstarter, and the many blog updates about Hollow Knight's development on Team Cherry's website, it was still crucial to create as much buzz as possible right before the game's release. The small indie studio's reputation, and possibly their future, all relied on whether or not Hollow Knight would go on to become a success. While their original Kickstarter goal was set to 35,000 Australian dollars, their estimated final budget for the game was between 90,000 and 100,000 Australian dollars, which was well over the amount of money they ultimately received from Kickstarter and PayPal donations.
Crazy.
Because of this, the developers were forced to take out a loan to cover some of the development
Insane.
costs. During the course of
So many
development,
people would donate
Team
right
Cherry had to
now.
make some drastic changes, sometimes even cutting huge chunks of content that were already implemented in the game. A good
What if the
example of this
community
is an
started a
area that was
Kickstarter of
called
like
the Bone
raising money
Forest.
just to get them to
It
drop
was a
it?
huge
Like, hey,
laser
we'll give
game
you
area filled with
give you
lava.
500K,
Cutting
just
it was
drop it.
tough at the time. It seemed so cool, but it was totally the right thing to
Early
do.
access.
William and I were already slammed with all the other enormous areas to build, and they all would have suffered for Bone Forest inclusion. A major part of development was spent balancing the difficulty, especially towards the end, when more testers were brought in to play the game. To get more accurate feedback, they used free applications like Trello to provide a way to highlight bugs and other problems. Some testers described the game's difficulty as pitch perfect, while others said it was punishingly difficult. From the beginning of development,
Yeah, it's perfect
Team
and
Cherry leaned
punishingly
more on making
difficult.
the game easier through various ways, such as
But you
guiding
get
players
good.
clearly,
That's all.
offering help through characters in the world, and the general
And then
flow
you
of the
lose it
game.
again, and then you
Another smaller example
gotta get good
is the
again.
slash size of the knight. The slash has been growing through all of development, and it just keeps going. It's grown to the point where you can sometimes whack enemies through walls and ceilings, and that's great. We're huge fans of small game breaks that allow players to cheat their way towards victory.
Yeah, I
The
love
promised
getting
Wii U version
like
was
kills through
eventually
walls.
dropped in favor for a Nintendo Switch version. By early 2017, it was clear that the Wii U was at the end of its life cycle, so it made much more sense to port the game to Nintendo's newest console. Yet it was still a difficult decision that Team Cherry had to make, since they promised Kickstarter backers a Wii U port. Luckily, by the time the Switch version was released, many backers had already moved over to the newer hybrid console. After almost 3 years of development, Hollow Knight was released on PC on the 24th of February 2017, followed by the Mac and Linux versions later that year on the 11th of April. The game received universal praise from critics and gamers, with many reviewers calling Hollow Knight a masterpiece. Everything from the combat to the lore seemed to click with gamers around the world, and it didn't take long for the game to sell 500,000 copies. After its release, there was still a lot of work left to be done. For starters, Team Cherry was still hard at work to finish the Nintendo Switch port. Fortunately, they were able to hire another Australian studio called Jumpshark Studios, who helped to rework the game's code for the Switch. The original plan was to release Hollow Knight on the Switch shortly after its release.
It was
but the
probably a
team had
sad
delayed the
era
game
when
to
this
June
was like a
12th,
game that like,
2018.
because I have
That
so many
day,
games that
Nintendo's
I'm like,
E3
oh, I wish I
direct
could play that, but it's not
presentation
on
took place,
console.
And during the presentation, it was announced that Hollow Knight would be available to purchase later that day. The Switch version was
That would have been
surprisingly popular,
amazing.
with 250,000 copies selling 2 weeks after its release. Besides the Switch
Crazy.
port, the studio was also figuring out how to implement a second playable character that was funded during the Kickstarter.
$250,000 in 2
During the
weeks on an
story,
indie
you meet
game.
a character called Hornet,
On that
and
console
Team Cherry
alone.
intended to make her a playable character in an upcoming DLC pack for Hollow Knight. However, in February 2019, it was announced that Hollow Knight would get a fully fledged sequel called Silksong, and that
When?
Hornet would be the main character.
When's that coming?
Between the game's release and the announcement of a sequel, Team Cherry worked on many updates to optimize the game, and even released 4 free DLC packs. Hidden Dreams, The Grim Troop, Lifeblood, and the final DLC pack Godmaster all provided fresh new content, such as new boss encounters, new quests, new music tracks, new enemies, new charms, and so on. This kept the experience fresh for veteran players and gave new players all the more reason to pick up and play Hollow Knight. In 2018, the game was eventually ported to Xbox and PlayStation as well, with official physical editions of the game coming out in 2019. In February 2019, Team Cherry revealed that Hollow Knight had sold over 2.8 million copies. Thanks to this overwhelming success, and
I'm
with
still waiting to
Silksong
find
on
like the
horizon,
random like
Team Cherry is
Xbox
able
copy
to
of
keep
Hollow
living their
Knight or
dream
something,
and
or like
make video
PlayStation
games for a
4.
living.
I've
Our
not
goal
seen
was
one out in the
always to
wild
get
yet.
ourselves into a position where we could just keep making stuff, and we're grateful we've gotten there thanks to everyone's support. Defining success back then was easy. It was just selling enough to be able to make another game. Had we achieved only that, we would have been happy.
Let's go. That guy Glenn, man. Best YouTuber out there. Please go check him out. He does these videos on so many games. I really want to watch the Doki Doki one, but I haven't played that game yet. But so many good videos and games. Please go watch him. Thank you guys for watching this. Silk Song soon, hopefully. Yep.